1. I was babysitting my nephew, who at the time was 1.5 years old, a very active kid. You can't lose sight of him or you'll find it stuck in the oven. It was 3 p.m., and he always takes a little nap at that time, so I left him in his bed and closed the door. I went to the bathroom, and when I came out, noted that the door was open, and I thought that he barely woke up, and he was making a mess in the living room. I called him, and he answered me from the kitchen. I ran there, and he was standing over the dining table. It's an old square wooden table, about 85 centimeters high, and my nephew is easily a few inches shorter. There are only 4 wooden chairs, and they were turned over on the table. I put them that way to prevent him from using them to get on there. The chairs are heavy. Even for me, it's a bit difficult to put them like that. If he tried to move them alone, they could fall on top of him and hurt him. There is no way that he could move those chairs alone without them falling on him or the chairs falling to the floor, and there is no chance that he would get on the table by himself. But there he was in the middle of the table with the 4 chairs turned over around him as I had left them. He wasn't even scared. He just saw me and told me, "Toti Toti." I asked him how he got up on the table. I carried him, and he kept saying "Toti Toti." I thought for a moment it was some toy that he was looking for, and I asked him, "What is Toti? Where is Toti?" And he turns and points to the corner of the kitchen where there was no one or anything. I froze for a moment, and the first thing I thought was, is there someone in the house? Someone broke in and put him on the table? No way. That doesn't make any sense, but either way, I grabbed my nephew, I took him to his room again. I checked the kitchen, the living room, the rooms, and nothing. There was no one in the whole house besides the 2 of us. I didn't want to think about the situation anymore. I just felt relieved that my nephew was fine, that he hadn't hurt himself in his little mischief. But I kept wondering, how did he get on the table? When my sister came home, I asked her which toy he called Toti, and she told me that it was not a toy, that apparently it was like some imaginary friend that my nephew had, that he had been talking to and playing with for like a week. I honestly hadn't planned to tell her what happened. I didn't want to get in trouble with her. I knew she would blame me and accuse me of leaving my nephew alone. But when she told me that it was Toti, I told her everything. I didn't want to rush to think that it was something paranormal. I just told her how weird the whole situation has been, and she just told me. You know how Joswy is? He managed somehow to find a way to get on the table. That's why I always ask you to keep an eye on him. He might have hurt himself. As I thought, okay, she was right. I kept taking care of him, but I was starting to get a little nervous because I always saw and heard him playing with Toti. And one day, I got a lot of courage, and I asked him, "Where is Toti?" And he takes my hand, leads me into the kitchen, and points in the same corner that he pointed out before. I freaked out for a moment, did my best to keep myself together, and later that day, I waited for my sister and asked my nephew the same question, and he did the same thing, took me to the kitchen, and kept pointing to the same place. For me, that wasn't normal, was really creepy, to be honest. But my sister just told me to stop asking him about Toti, that if I keep doing that, it only feeds his fantasy and it was not good for him. So I just did what she told me, and I never asked him about Toti again. After that, I started to have this weird feeling that someone else was there with us. But I just ended up ignoring the situation. I didn't want to suggest it to myself, so I took my sister's attitude and didn't think about it anymore. I convinced myself that it was nothing paranormal, it was just a child's imagination. He kept playing with Toti for a while longer until he grew up, and didn't mention him again. That was about 2 years ago, and every time I remember that, I still wonder who was Toti, and how he got on the table by himself. 2. I used to work as a cleaner when I was 16 and between colleges. This is the UK, so I had already left school. The place I worked was a popular clothing store near my house, and built over ancient farmland. Also, rumors of druid burial grounds nearby, but that's another story. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal from a very young age. but this was by far the most haunted place I've ever worked, and my first apparition sighting. We were a team of 4 to 5, and all of us were assigned to different parts of the store. One of the sections was the women's fitting rooms. We would vacuum the rugs and cubicles, polish the mirrors, and all of that. You would hear high heels on the tiles the whole time you were down there, and sounds of rustling paper, coat hangers rattling, etc. General feeling of discomfort and unease, as though you were being followed and watched. This is hours before the store opens, so no customers. Sometimes a manager would be there, but they stayed upstairs in the office. The next part was the men's clothing area, which was on the second floor. When you cleaned there, you were alone but for the occasional manager walking through. One time I was on the floor cleaning the railings by the cash registers, and a huge black shadow swept over me. I was surprised because I hadn't heard anybody approach, and as I looked around, I was definitely alone. My cleaning routine was to sweep the floor and collect the dirt into little piles around the pillars, then sweep it all up in one go at the end. The dirt piles moved constantly. I would go back to do the final big sweep and some of the piles had disappeared. After I clocked out, the piles would be there again. I had a sense the spirit was a young male farmhand and mischievous. Said as much to my coworker, and she told me she refuses to clean that area after polishing the mirrors one day and seeing the disembodied head of a young man peering over her shoulder. Again, the sound of coat hangers rattling and shuffling noises, but I never felt threatened by it. Used to laugh it off or tell the spirit to stop, and he would most of the time. Now, after the store was clean, we would clean the staff quarters, toilets and canteen, meeting rooms. The toilets were a non-paranormal horror in themselves. Note, I worked here with my mother. We were assigned to clean the female toilets, and usually, if somebody was using them, we would leave and give them privacy until they finished. We went in, the middle stall was closed, and we heard rustling paper and heavy breathing, so we left and waited, and waited, and waited. The cleaning cupboard was right next to the toilets and didn't even have a door. We would have seen and heard somebody leaving. To leave and enter the toilets, you would have to walk straight past the open doorway, and then walk down the corridor that directly faced it, an L-shaped corridor with the toilets on the far end and the cleaning cupboard on the corner. Except when we went in after waiting for 10 to 15 minutes, the middle stall door was wide open and empty. Now on to the apparition. Children's clothing area was generally less creepy. Coat hangers moving again, sometimes things would fall off the shelves and rails, but we shrugged it off. The elevator was directly opposite the children's clothing, and we usually loaded our cleaning equipment into the elevator because it was too heavy to carry up the stairs. I remember rinsing my mop out, and I glanced up. There was a little boy, around 6 or 7 years old, standing directly in front of me. He wore a flat cap, a pale shirt with suspenders, dark shorts and socks up to his knees. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, and when I blinked, he was gone. Thought I was just tired and shook my head. Spoke to my mother about it later, as she is a Wiccan and super into the supernatural, and described the boy to her. She had seen the exact same child a few weeks before, but only the back of him, like he was walking around the corner. She told me she had the feeling he had died of a lung-related sickness, perhaps tuberculosis or pneumonia. So there you have it. Some of it can be explained by tiredness, I know, but just thought I'd share this experience here. 3. My house was built in the 1950s, but the land had been in my family since before the Civil War. There was a farmhouse there before the war, which was burnt down. I live in the southern United States. So my house wasn't old, but the land and the history sure was. My ancestors were white farmers who helped run escaped slaves up north before and during the war. We have always been proud of our civil rights involvement. My grandmother marched in several demonstrations in the 60s. This is all just background info. Let's get to the apparitions. My great-auntie was a sensitive, as was my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mom, though Mom wasn't as sensitive as the other women in the family. I got my sensitivity from these incredible women. I am not psychic. I am not esoteric. I can only tell you what I experienced growing up. My house was a 2-story with an attic and basement. It was a big house with so many rooms. My first memory of the paranormal was when I was in kindergarten. I was walking upstairs to my room when I heard an old radio show playing from another upstairs bedroom. Our guest rooms had old radios and TVs that didn't work but looked very vintage cool. I sat down and listened, laughing at the jokes. When I rose back up and took one step up, the sound stopped. So I went back to the step I sat on and heard it again. When I stepped down to the next step, it was silent. I could only hear it from that step. I didn't always hear the radio when I stood on that step, but that step is the only place I heard it. There was a ghost I would play with on those steps too, a little boy in brown short pants, with brown shoes and a white button-up shirt. He would appear when I was going upstairs, hanging his legs through the banisters along the upstairs landing. He would laugh and wave. Sometimes he would get up and run. My mom played with the same child ghost when she was little. Sometimes, when I was in my room sleeping, the sounds of a small party of people would wake me up. It was coming from the room where I thought the radio I heard on the steps would play. I would listen to people laughing, hear them moving around, smell cigarettes even though no one in my house smoked. I would get fed up after a while and stick my head out the door. I would ask them to keep it down. I had school the next day. The ghost would go silent after that. I would see a tall, sad black woman in my basement. She wore a long, simple brown skirt with a reddish-pink shirt. She wore a white scarf on her head. Sometimes she would be weeping in the corner. I asked my great-grandmother about that corner, and she told me that the old house had a hidden tunnel that my ancestors would hide slaves in. While our house wasn't in the same location as the old house, the tunnel ran right through the spot where we would eventually have our basement. There were other things that happened in the house. 4. So I was maybe 3 years old, back in the 80s, living in an old farmhouse with my mom, father, and 2 brothers. The house was an old 2-story with a creepy basement. My room at this time was upstairs, second door on the right. My room is set up so you come to the door, you can see the dresser straight on, with a closet door being blocked to its right. My bed foot to wall to the dresser left, and an armoire to the bed's right. Nothing else in the room. My middle brother had the room to the left, right next to mine. It was late, and I had fallen asleep on the couch downstairs in the living room in just my t-shirt and underwear. My mom woke me up and told me to go to bed. I had no problem with this, I was tired. So I walk upstairs, past the first door on my right, and then get to my bedroom. My bedroom door was open. I go to walk over the threshold of the door, and I get stopped. No, I didn't stop, I got stopped. I could not walk into my room. It was like there was a wall in front of me, and it would not let me by. I started crying. I think I started crying for my mom, 'cause she ended up coming upstairs. I told her the room wouldn't let me in. She gave me a look, and she laughed a little. My mom asked me what I meant. I told her I could not go into my room, it wouldn't let me. Meanwhile, I'm still bawling my head off. I'm tired and confused. I ask her if I can sleep in my brother's room. My brother ends up waking up because of my crying. So I ask him if I can sleep in his room. He looks at my mom, he looks at me, walks back into his room and shuts the door. My mom tries to make me feel better and asks me if she wants me to check for monsters. I nod my head yes, and to my surprise, he just walks into my bedroom. I couldn't do that, how could she? Anyway, she opens up the armoire and looks inside, and then she checks under my bed. Now, my bedroom was spotless, save for one white sock and 2 red stripes laying on the floor in front of the dresser. While my mom was looking under the bed, I was looking at that sock from the threshold of my doorway. And out from underneath my dresser came a wooden hand to grab up the sock. I freaking lost it. I screamed, I peed myself, and all I could do was point and say, "Grab it." My brother came back out of his room. I was crying hysterically. He was trying to tell me to shut up. My mom comes over to me, and she kneels down in front of me, trying to calm me. She asks what I'd seen. I told her I'd seen a hand that looked like wood, the same color as the dresser, medium brown, come out from underneath the dresser and grab the sock and pull it back under with it. My mom straight up laughed at me then, but she turned around on her knees and was going to look under the dresser. Fear washed over me as I thought my mom was going to get grabbed under the dresser. The wall that blocked me was gone. I pounced on her, trying to drag her away from the dresser. Not that a child can drag an adult. She then realized how terrified I was. So to prove to me there was nothing under my dresser, she pulled it away from the wall. Now there was no hand. However, there was a white sock with 2 red stripes, sitting as if it got pulled right up to the wall. Needless to say, I never had to sleep in that room again. No one slept in that room again. It became a storage room. My mom no longer lives in that house. The dresser is still around. It's at my mom's new house. And in the bottom drawer is a crucifix that has candles and holy water inside of it, and a Bible lays next to the crucifix. Just in case.
5. I was recently talking with my family about the paranormal, and my mom just reminded me of this story. A few years ago, my pop-pop was dying from cancer, and we knew he didn't have much time left. My mom was staying with him at his house to take care of him till his final moments. Something to note was that during my mom's stay there, every day, without fail, a gopher tortoise would come out in the backyard of my pop-pop's house. He would just walk around the back there, and it would become a routine to spot him each day, and they would talk about the tortoise afterwards. The day had come, and Pop-Pop had passed away peacefully. It was very hard for my mom, as she and my Pop-Pop always had a special bond. The day after he passed, and Mom was helping my grandma and uncle move and sort some important personal items from the house. While moving some boxes in the front yard, my mom saw something significant. She saw a gopher tortoise, and this tortoise had walked all the way up to my Pop-Pop's long wheelchair ramp to the front porch and began pawing against the front door like he wanted to go inside the house. My uncle and grandma also witnessed this. It was the oddest thing. My mom, though, she doesn't really believe in ghosts. She does believe it was some sort of sign from my Pop-Pop. I like to believe it was as well. I've heard stories of significant types of animals showing up after a loved one passes. Maybe my Pop-Pop wanted to check up on my mom and uncle and grandma. I love and miss him.
6. So it begins with my parents' house brand new when they bought it. My family has been the only people to live in it, and I'd lived there between the ages of 2 to 21. My bedroom in the house was at one end of the hallway, with another bedroom on the opposite end. The doors faced each other. Just outside my bedroom door was the manhole to get into the roof. For some reason as a child, I was dead terrified of that manhole, and more so the space in the hallway underneath it. I have no idea why, I simply could not explain it. My parents, being the sadists they are, made fun of my fear and more or less exacerbated it, saying there were ghosts or skeletons up there and other things of the sort. I knew all that was rubbish, but still the unnerving feeling of it remained. A lot of the night I would see shadow people in that space, though I've come to the conclusion that it was most likely my eyes playing tricks. My mom once told me that when she was in my older brother's room, the one directly opposite mine down the hallway, tidying up one night while my brothers and I were playing with relatives, she had seen the figure of a man standing at the other end of the hallway. She blinked, and he was gone, and she thought mostly nothing of it. I was about 16 and in high school. I met a girl named Liz. We started dating pretty soon after meeting. We hung out a lot, and she'd been to my parents' place a few times. After a few weeks of us dating, during a conversation, we got onto the topic of the paranormal. She told me she'd had many paranormal experiences in her life, and she believed she was somewhat of a medium. I doubted her. She told me about how her grandmother's porcelain dolls were haunted or possessed. They'd move on their own, and in one instance, she and her sister had to trap one under a box while it freaked out and tried to escape. Another thing she told me was that there was a ghost of a girl who was standing under a tree in the backyard of the house she lived in at the time. These were among many other things. I hadn't shared any experiences I'd had, as I never, in my opinion, had any as far as I was concerned. Now, as I said, I doubted her, so I tried to test her. I asked Liz if there was any creepy goings-on with my parents' house. What she said next shook me to my fucking core. She said there was something just outside my bedroom door under the manhole. Not necessarily a ghost or entity of sorts, just a kind of thing. An energy or incomprehensible mass. That's the best I can describe it from how she did at the time. I couldn't bloody believe it. How could she know? It had never been mentioned before to her, not by me or my family, and I don't exactly go around telling people. Other than that, Liz mentioned another space in the house, an area off the back lounge room, that was completely mundane to me. Nevertheless, this solidified my belief that she was, in whatever capacity, a medium. This part takes place a few years later. Liz and I had broken up but stayed good friends. Myself and a few acquaintances were sort of into abandoned and creepy places. We came across a place that had once been an asylum for the mentally ill that had been semi-converted into a university campus. It was a fairly large place with multiple buildings of various sizes. I won't divulge the location. Our visits there were definitely trespassing and breaking and entering, and I'll skip over most of them since they weren't that interesting. One night myself, Liz and her younger brother Grant and another group of acquaintances went to have another look around. Liz and Grant hadn't been there before and were keen to have a look. After walking around the grounds and having a look in anywhere we could get into, we found that the doors to the theater hall in the middle of the ground were unlocked, so enter we did. The hall was fairly large and empty. A simple big rectangle box room with a stage at one end. It looked as if it hadn't been used in a while. Grant and I noticed a small, thin stairway that led up to what we assumed was a projector room, judging by the small openings in the wall above us. Liz, Grant, and I went up to have a look while the others stayed. This room had clearly not been entered for a very long time, completely caked in dust and spider webs, and even some old reel projectors and reels strewn about. We were up there for a few minutes, Grant and I amused with the old tech and the fact that it was horrid and dark. We didn't realize what Liz was doing. I eventually turned to Liz. She stood facing a corner, looking slightly upwards, and as still as a statue. I think she was there the entire time we were up there. I asked her if she was all right. She responded without moving, and completely affixed on whatever she was looking at, with a, "We have to leave." I said, "What? Why?" "We have to get out right fucking now, just go." She had an incredibly serious tone. I know she's completely serious and not to mess around when she speaks like that. Grant and I leave the room and back down the tiny stairs quick smart, with Liz in tow, looking over her shoulder. Later on that night, I asked her what the deal was and she refused to speak about it. I asked her a couple years later what exactly it was she was uncomfortable enough to talk about. The only way she could describe it was not necessarily a demon, but something of the sort. Just very, very not nice. In conclusion, that's my paranormal experience, if one could really call it that. I've since lost contact with Liz and the others that were there at the time of Part 3. Not for any particular reason, just time, really. I mean, that all happened about 8 or so years ago now. If anyone's got any questions or would like clarification and whatnot, I'm happy to answer them. Thanks for listening. 7. Background. I've seen a lot, but there's one situation from when I was little that continuously disturbs me in particular. I had a close childhood friend, Toby, who lived in a roughly 300-year-old mansion on a large estate with many secret rooms and tunnels. The place was an archaeologist's dream, I say as an archaeologist. So many historically unique touches, features, and artifacts on site, and popping up from gopher holes to rainy seasons. There was one particular secret room his parents absolutely forbade their kids from going into. One day when I was over, Toby and his siblings told me about this room and said they didn't want to go up there and wondered if I'd take one of the team to find out what the room was like. We'd all experienced weird occurrences in that house. And looking back on it as an adult, I suspect they preferred not to face another scary experience themselves, if avoidable. Or they'd already been in the room against their parents' wishes and wanted an outsider to go in and see what they might have already seen. The sighting. The room was accessed through a roughly 4x4 off section of ceiling boards attached to each other that you would push on in a deep cabinet on one of the guest suites. I turned on the headlight they gave me and flashlight, pushed it open. I pushed myself up, and I went all the way through and stood up. The opening closed behind me, so I thought they'd closed the boards and I was a little annoyed, but I stayed in place. I was stunned at how large the room was. I'd say it was the size of a nice dining room. It was dusty as hell, cobwebs all over the place. I started coughing like mad. I slowly led my flashlight around the room. There was a large circular table underneath a large candle chandelier. There were at least 5 chairs around the table. A couple pushed out and one knocked over. Papers were strewn around the room, and there were many crates. Bottles and books were stacked on the table in crates or toppled on the floor throughout the room. There were some very small doors, one per each wall, that I could see. Never looked behind me. Then I noticed her. In the corner across the room was what appeared to be a girl close to my age with a blurred face and a dark blonde bob haircut in a light dress with light tights and dark shoes. I'd experienced a lot of weird sightings in the past, and whenever I'd tell my mom, her advice was just say hello to the dark and to the scary things and talk to them and make it less scary. So I said, "Hey, and I gave my name. I'm just exploring this room. I'll be gone soon." I don't understand how or what happened next, but in like a second she was standing right in front of me. Just there, no running, no walking, no movement toward me. Just there in my face, suddenly faceless. Barely less than my height. Everything was fairly quiet for what felt like way too long. Heavy breathing on my part, scared to death. Then she starts screaming in my face. I stayed silent in shock and semi-disassociation. Conclusion. I heard Toby and his siblings scrambling below, banging on the entrance. I heard them yell for their dad. There was a lot of commotion for what felt like a few minutes, with this faceless girl screaming at me, and the family below yelling up to me and at each other while they tried to get the entrance open. After a few minutes, I guess the floor was broken open with a pickaxe. The dad was holding it when I got back down to the main room. I felt a large hand grab my ankle and pull at me. It was just the dad, though, trying to pull me out. I scrambled out of the broken entrance pretty quickly. They asked me what I'd been screaming for. I said, "I didn't scream. You heard a scream too?" We were all sat down for a long lecture in the kitchen after that. The dad said we needed to be sure to keep our imaginations about this house to ourselves, and I wasn't invited back to their house. Toby and I mostly drifted apart, which saddened me. When his parents found him trying to see me down the blocks, or saw us interacting at community events, they separated us. I realized as I got older that Toby very likely had no choice in the distancing. Because of the recent release of Haunting of Bly Manor with the fucking faceless ghosts, I'm making a footnote to say that I know you might be rolling your eyes thinking this is some annoying writing prompt or fictional story, but it's not. I made the mistake of watching Bly Manor. I like to watch ghost stories to feel less weird and alone in my experiences. Somehow it helps. Which just ended up triggering the hell out of me about this particular memory. to a point I haven't gotten to before, though it's often on my mind. Should have known better, because there were a few aspects of Haunting of Hill House, too, that were eerily similar to what Toby and I went through at his place, aside from the screaming, faceless girl, and I struggled after watching that, too. Well, maybe I'll write my own fictionalized book of Toby's house and others one day, as a coping mechanism at least. I haven't been handling my variety of paranormal memories well lately, which came as a surprise to me, especially since I did so well living in an 800-year-old room in grad school, where I had daily ghostly experiences, and I work in very historically charged places that I mostly end up being so apathetic to it on a fear level. I started seeing a therapist that specializes in this area last month, though. I didn't even know that was a thing until recently. I'd taken myself to psychiatrists many times over the years, asking for diagnostic tests for schizophrenia and delusion disorders, and I've never been diagnosed with one. I don't know what I believe about the paranormal, but I believe people can have these currently unexplainable experiences without it being a disorder or their imagination playing tricks on them. 8. Our parents met when we were babies. We were practically sisters. I came from a rough background, so I happened to be with them more than I was not. We probably knew each other better than we knew ourselves. We did everything together. We told each other every little secret. I was her amusement, and she was my hype man. Later on in high school, our different personalities led us to different friend circles. We still talked and hung out, though not as often. When I was 16, she moved an hour away, and we started talking even less frequently than before, touching base only every now and then. Small important detail: her mother's hometown is about 4 hours from her new location, 3 from mine. I had gone to class early one day, something I never did. There was this girl that sat in the desk in front of me, and her friend that sat across from her already there. It was the 3 of us alone, so I pulled out my books and preoccupied myself until everyone else poured in. I started tuning into their conversation as I hear them talking about one of the students passing away in a bad car accident caused by a drunk driver. The friend inquired in a curious manner who it was. That's when she said it. She said my best friend's name. I stopped her. My heart is pounding so hard. It feels like it's going to jump out of my chest. It hurts to the point I want to throw up. I stopped them from proceeding with their discussion. I questioned her to describe the student in question. She describes my best friend. I feel like the breath has been kicked from my lungs. I can't breathe. I asked the teacher, whose ultimate goal was to make my hour with her hell. For the first time, as tears built up in my eyes, she became human. She excused me from class. To say I had a panic attack is putting it lightly. I called my mom. She came and got me to take me home. I sat there on the floor of my room. I felt like my mind was crumbling. The unbearable pain, my chest, I can't think straight. I started throwing up uncontrollably, and my head was pounding. My friend since kindergarten left school when she got word of the passing. She found a mess of me laying there. She asked me to go for a ride, something we always did to find peace or just talk. As I sat there in the passenger seat trailer and broken, I can't keep it together. I don't even know where to start. I'm helpless. I decided to Google. That's when I found out her parents are in critical condition in their new location's hospital. I start throwing up again. I decided we have to go to them. They weren't the family that I was born into, but they were the family that raised me. Being young teens driving to a city 3 times the size, we didn't realize how many hospitals there are and HIPAA laws that apply. I returned home feeling failed. When I walked in the door, Mom saw what a raggedy mess of me existed before her. She just hugged me tight and I ugly cried. This was my first funeral, my first experience with death. I ended up getting the details of the funeral. It's going to be in the mom's hometown. It's 3 hours from mine and my best friend's hometown. My friend that supported me through the worst day of my life, my best friend's death, accompanied me to the services. The thoughts on that 3-hour drive were heavier the closer we approached. What about her parents? I can't even think of how they feel. I would give anything to make this all not our current reality. Why them, the kindest people I knew? As we pulled into the cathedral parking lot, I didn't know if I was prepared to do this. If I walk in there, this becomes real. I didn't know how much more of this heavy heart I could take. My friend grabbed my hand, and then we went. The services were beautiful, something you would see in a movie. It still was so unreal. And then I see them, her parents. As the services concluded, we stood in a long line of family and friends I recognized from my ventures under their roof. All who I hadn't seen in quite a few years. My best friend's parents included, since they moved away. While in line, there was a guy about 7 years older than us talking about my best friend, to what I assume is his toddler son. He turns around and asks how we knew her. I say we were best friends since babies. He says my name to me, and I confirm. We said our condolences to one another. My friend went first, as I prepared to face my best friend's immediate family. I didn't understand why I was so afraid to face them. It was the mom, dad, and sister standing there, bare to the room in front of them. I walked up to the sister, who was first. Immediately she recognized me. When she said my name, her face lit up. Her parents heard the commotion. They turned and immediately embraced me. When I walked back to the car with my friend, I just felt exhausted. I sat in the car and just cried. Then I felt too tired even for that. It was the quietest 3 hours I think either of us were prepared for. As soon as I got to my bed, it was even empty of dreams. My mind was too tired and heavy to dream. I don't even remember the few days that followed. It was all a blur. Now, I would like to remind you I mentioned I grew up in a rough background. My dad used to violently beat my mother in front of my brother and me. As a result, I suffer PTSD where I don't usually dream, and if I do, it's nightmares. Except this night was different. I was at school and the hallways were packed. The noise was drowning. I was by the stairs and then my best friend walked up to me. She didn't say a word. I was so excited to see her, I just hugged her so tight. I was telling her how much I missed her. She was just taking it all in with a smile quietly, not saying a word. That's when it hits me. It's impossible. You're not supposed to be here. I rushed to the stairs, trying to make sense of what's going on. I rushed into class and sit down in an unusually packed classroom of chatting students. She walks into the class and pulls up a seat across from me. The room feels deafening now, not a noise as we're starting to stare at one another. I get up and flee out the door. The hallway's empty. Then I stop in my tracks. How can I run from my best friend? I turn around, and there she is, already standing in front of me. It's like she was talking to me with telepathy. She's telling me it's okay. I don't have to be sad. I don't have to be scared. It was okay. She said she had to go, then she turned to walk away. I tried to grab her. I wanted so bad to stop her. Please don't leave. I can't do this without you. I'm lost without you. With every step, she fades away a little more. And there I stood, all alone. I ended up working for her mom as a personal assistant years later when I had my daughter. One day, we exchanged accounts of our experiences to one another. My best friend came to her too, but in person. Different experience, but same message. 9. My sister has been able to see and communicate with the dad ever since she can remember. She practices Wicca, is a gifted tarot card reader, and started helping people rid their homes of spirits after she decided to start using her abilities to help others, including a gas station that I used to work at. My dad has always been a skeptic and truly believed my sister had a mental disorder causing her to have hallucinations. That is, up until the day his truck became home to an unwanted spirit. One evening my dad was working late, well after dark. When he finally got home, he came into the house with a disturbed look on his face. He was quiet and went into the other room to talk to my mom. I could overhear him telling her that on his way home, he got a creepy feeling that someone was sitting right next to him in his truck. He said that all of a sudden his airbag light turned on from the passenger seat. That light only turns on if somebody is sitting in the seat, because it detects if there is weight on the seat. He told himself that it was probably some electrical issue, until he could actually see the outline of a dark figure sitting there out of the corner of his eye. Whenever he'd look over, it would be gone. He sped home as fast as he could so he could get out of the truck. He didn't know what to think about it, other than it scared the crap out of him. My mom witnessed my sister rid a ghost out of the gas station I worked out of, so she suggested that my sister take a look at what's in his truck. At this point, I was in the other room with him asking more questions about his experience. I'm not gifted like my sister is, but I am sensitive to spirits and have always took interest in the paranormal. I even have conducted my own investigations with some friends in the past. My sister came into the room and we got her up to speed with what's going on. She said that she would go check out his truck and asked me to come with her. What I experienced next still gives me chills to this day. We went outside to his truck and my sister climbed into the driver's seat. She was silent and looked over on the passenger seat. She said, "It's still in here." She turned the truck on and the passenger airbag light turned on again like it did for her dad. I need a quick note that this was in the dead of winter in Minnesota, so it was crazy cold out and we could see our breath when we exhaled. She turned to the passenger seat and blew out a breath of air. I witnessed her breath flow forward and then float around what had to have been a solid figure in the seat, but nothing was visibly there. Chills as she turned to me and said that we need to get it out of there ASAP for Dad's safety. We went back into the house and she explained to her dad what it was. She said this type of spirit is known as a hitchhiker. She said that they are generally malevolent spirits that, just like a hitchhiker, jump into random cars driving down the road. She said that these can be dangerous, though, because they can do things like make your brakes go out in your car so that you'll crash, or do other things with your vehicle to ensure that you get injured or even die. After hearing this, as skeptical as my dad normally is, he gave her permission to do what she needs to do to get it out of his truck. She turned to me and told me that she needs me because she needs an assistant for what she's about to do. She gathered some items from her room, and we went outside. She performed some sort of a ritual outside of his truck and had me join her. I cannot remember all the details of this ritual because it was completely new to me and this was years ago. I believe it involved a feather, a knife that she had harnessed her energy through, a jar with some sort of charmed leather bag with unknown items in it and symbols painted on it, and various other tools. After performing the ritual, she smudged the inside of his truck with sage. She turned the truck on, and the airbag light was still on like someone was sitting there. Then she whipped open all of the car doors and shouted at it to leave, because it was not wanted and was never invited. She told me that it didn't want to leave and that it was being stubborn. After some time of her shouting at it and doing something else with her tools in his truck, she took a deep breath and told me that it finally left. Sure enough, the airbag light turned off in the truck. We went inside and she told my dad that she was able to get it to leave. Ever since this happened, his airbag light has never turned on by itself again, and he never saw or felt some unknown being sitting in his truck again. To this day, my dad doesn't like to talk about it, but all I know is that he's now a believer and no longer thinks my sister has a mental disorder. 10. This is a collection of scary and weird stuff that has happened in my house. Falling toys. The earliest thing I can remember that really freaked me out about my house was a reoccurring experience of soft toys that I had put away on top of my wardrobe suddenly falling to the floor. I would notice that a toy that had definitely been on top of my wardrobe before I went to bed would be on the floor when I woke up the next morning. Being a very young kid, it did freak me out, but I didn't really understand ghosts or anything, so I just kinda laughed it off, thinking it was the wind or poor placement of the toys. But as this became more common, I became more unsettled. I remember once when I heard a soft thud. I turned to see a toy hedgehog now on the floor. I was fed up at this point, and so I picked up the toy and said to the empty air, "If that was you, do it again." Nothing happened, so I brushed it off and tried to go on. I told my younger sister about what had been happening, and we both laughed about it. I had asked if she had any similar experiences, but she said no. The last time I can remember a toy falling from my wardrobe was the worst of all. My sister had a friend over for a sleepover, and she had told her friend about the weird experiences. Her friend had asked to see it, so they came to my room. All three of us stood near the doorway, and I noticed a hedgehog on the floor again. I called out once again to the empty air, "If there is someone here, knock a toy off the wardrobe." We all waited in silence until suddenly there was a soft thud, and a toy had fallen. I don't remember much of what I was thinking. All I remember was hearing someone scream and running out of my room. A toy hasn't fallen off the wardrobe since. Sounds in the night. The next thing I remember happening in my house was a collection of small, unsettling things that happened in the middle of the night. I have always had trouble sleeping, so it was not uncommon for me to be awake long into the night when everyone else was asleep. It was during these unsettled nights that I would hear and experience a lot of things I couldn't explain. The most common thing I remember happening was various creaks and sounds of people moving around. It wasn't unusual for my floorboards to creak, but they would only creak when people were walking around. But every time I would check to see if anyone was up and moving, they'd all still be fast asleep, and my sister's door would still be closed. There were so many occurrences of my hearing the sounds of scratching at my door if it was closed. This wasn't something that worried me, as we had always owned cats, so I would just go and open the door to let them in. However, on multiple occasions I opened the door to an empty corridor and no cats even upstairs. That never sat right with me. The most disturbing and unexplainable thing that happened in the night was something I'll never forget. It had been a completely normal night. I had fallen asleep moderately easy, but a few hours later I woke back up and couldn't get back to sleep. I was frustrated, but so young that I didn't have a phone to keep me entertained, so I was sat doing nothing until I could fall back asleep. However, before I could even get tired, a loud crash sounded through my room. I looked up frantically to see a small yellow ball bouncing on my floor like it had just been thrown into my room. I was terrified. I picked up the ball and ran into the corridor expecting to see maybe my sister or my mom. But the house was silent. My parents were fast asleep, and my sister's door was closed. For context, my sister always closes her door at night, and we always know when her door opens because her door has always been unbearably loud when opening. It creaks and floods the entire house with noise, so I knew immediately that she had not left her room that night. Moving doors. Another common occurrence in my house that still happens to this day is doors opening and closing without any wind or human influence. The most notable instance of this was one day where I was washing my hands and suddenly the bathroom door swung closed. I looked up in panic and watched as the door began to swing open and closed. I shouted to see if anyone was on the landing, but my family were all downstairs. I cautiously turned around and called out for whatever was there to prove itself by closing the door. After a few seconds' pause, the door slammed shut and I screamed, quickly opening the door and running out of the bathroom. Once I had calmed down, I went back to the bathroom, thinking it might have been the wind, but to my horror, the window was closed tight. Ouija board sessions. For Christmas one year, I asked for a Ouija board. I was a weird kid. I used the board a few times with my family in locations other than my own house. I had never been confident enough to use it in my home, knowing the already concerning experiences I had had over the years. I was too scared to risk communicating with whatever may be living in the house. But one night, I decided that I felt brave enough to use the board in my house. It was around 2 a.m. I had got the board out ready and opened it, using the safest methods I knew. I sat with my fingers resting on the planchette for a few minutes. I was too scared to ask anything.
It felt like all of my courage from moments ago had vanished into thin air. I sat in tense silence for a few minutes, before finally asking a question. "Is there anyone there who would like to communicate?" I asked quietly, not wanting to wake the others in my house. Almost instantaneously, the planchette slid across the board. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I hadn't expected a response, especially not one this quickly. I tried to quell my building panic as the planchette flew across the board and sat firmly on yes. I sucked in a sharp breath and tried to think of what to ask next. "What's your name?" I asked, more cautiously. No response. How old are you?" Still nothing. I asked a few more questions, still to no avail. I got one explicit response and then nothing more. Not even a shift. The planchette sat completely motionless, on yes. Feeling defeated, I shut down the board. However, I couldn't just leave it like that. I had an uneasy feeling brewing in my stomach. I sat and contemplated what to do for a while, before deciding to reopen the board and try again. I repeated the opening process and got ready to ask the questions again, this time with more determination. "Is anyone there who would like to communicate?" I asked. Once again, the planchette flew to yes, this time with more force. I had to swallow back a yelp at the action. I repeated the same questions from the previous session, and still I received no response apart from the first response. My blood ran cold. I felt as if there was a looming presence in the room, watching my every move, but I couldn't see anyone. I closed the board frantically and hid it behind my bed. The feeling of pure terror didn't leave. I didn't fall asleep that night. I have never used that board in my room since. Sometimes, when I see it in the corner of my eye, I can still feel that terrifying presence looming over my shoulder. I have not had any extreme experiences in a while now, and whenever I've spoken to my family about it, they have laughed and said, yes, I was imagining things, but I can't help but worry about what is living in this house. And why is it only coming from me? Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to this paranormal video. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, I'm not entirely sure what this one should be called, to be honest with you. It's sort of a mishmash, and some new stories as well. See, I had a couple of videos there that were privated, meaning I couldn't really use them for anything until I decided what to do with them. And the reasons for the privating was one person had asked for their story to be removed because I won't say which story it was. But those of you who heard it originally, great, you'll never get to hear it again. So I hope you enjoyed it. You are the select few, my friends. But essentially, someone who was involved in the story, not the author, didn't want that story being out there, so I was asked to remove it. So it was removed. The other story was removed for more personal reasons. Don't worry, I haven't done anything naughty, but I wasn't comfortable keeping that story in the video. There's one or two other videos that have been privated for the same reasons. I'll rework those and get them out there when I get a chance. I'm not really going to explain why. It's a matter, there's no point bringing it up. It's done and dusted, water under the bridge, and we've moved on. So, that did, however, leave me with 8 stories between the 2 videos that could not be listened to, could not be viewed. So I thought to myself, well, there's no point them sitting there, so okay, let's take them and we'll put them in a video together, and then we'll record a couple of news stories just, to round it out. You don't put 8 stories in a video, you put 10 stories in a video. So we had 10 stories, put them all together, and that would give us a nice, big, fat, juicy paranormal video. I'm making myself hungry, actually. I've been thinking about food. I've been thinking about something roasted with mashed potatoes, roast, like with broccoli, maybe some sweet corn, gravy on top there. I should do that. In fact, yeah, I should definitely do that. We'll see what time I have at the weekend. Right, okay. That moves us along to me stopping talking about food and getting on to the business of the day, which is we have a couple of birthday shout-outs to do today, so let's see who the birthday peoples are today. One of them's not a people. Oh, they're a cat. Can cats be people? I guess cats are people to their owners. And I guess their owners are pets to the cats. Anyway, let's see who we have. Okay, shout-out number 1 goes to... Okay, there were shenanigans in the arranging of this birthday shout-out. Kim, your daughter stole your phone. Don't call the police, it was for good reasons. And they sent me a message through your email account telling me that you turned 60 this year. So a very happy birthday to you, Kim. Sorry, no, you don't turn 60, you turn 49.95. Because, of course, I was just being presumptuous by assuming that you were 60. Forget I said anything, except the happy birthday part. A very happy birthday to you. And as you're so young and pretty, then you should most definitely treat yourself. But don't give your daughter any cake for stealing your phone. Give them cake for arranging the birthday shout out, though. But you get more because you're the birthday girl. Right, now, birthday shout-out number 2. Number 2 goes to a special little kitty cat called Shadow. Oh, I don't know if I meant to post a picture, but I got a cute little picture of Shadow in a lovely little, kind of like a red or a pink dress. That's kind of like deep pink with hearts on it. Looking not amused by the outfit, but very adorable nonetheless. And Shadow is 12 years old today. A very happy birthday to you, Shadow. Meow, 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 meow. Right, now, before we get to the question of the day, because why the hell not? Let's treat ourselves. We'll have a question of the day, too. I'm going to sing happy birthday to our birthday girls. Okay. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Kim. Dear Shadow. Happy birthday to you. Well, I kind of dragged that one out at the end a little there, didn't I? I was wondering, how long can I go before it sounds weird? But okay, that's fine. There we go. Right, let's see. Let's move along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. Okay, I have 2. One is just, do you think it's weird that I don't play video games on stream that have guns in them, or is that something you appreciate? I do play them in private. I just don't put them out there for, there's enough real violence in the world. So, I think people come to me to chill out. That's my thinking. But now, the more fun Hellfreezer's question of the day is... Firstly, sorry, I'm hungry, so it's going to be another food one. Right. Ideal breakfasts. Now, for me, it's a full fry-up. Some would call it full English. I would slap them about the face and say it's a full Scottish. So for me, that would basically be... You're going to call a doctor after you hear this. It's 3 eggs, right? 2 Lorne sausage. Look them up. They're delicious. Then 3 or 4, depending how many's in the packet. Sometimes it's 6, sometimes it's 8. So basically half a packet of links of some kind or another. There's various ones. Sometimes I go for bratwurst or, it's fine. Very yummy sausages. Right, so we've got the eggs. We've got the 2 types of sausages. Right? No. We're not done. Sit down. Then we get to the bacon, about 3 slices of that. Then potato scones. There's usually 6 in a packet, so I do 3 of those. And let's see, with the eggs, potato scones.
And I like 3 slices of black pudding. I don't have this all the time, by the way. 3 slices of sliced haggis, right? Don't knock it till you tried it. And let me think, is that everything? Let's see, we've got the 2 kinds of sausage, the eggs, the bacon, the eggs, the bacon, the potato scones, the black pudding. Right, that's all the food. And then what we do, I don't like tomatoes when they're in their slimy form, right? I like them in sauces. I'm learning to tolerate them, providing they're not too slimy, on sandwiches. Right? Very yummy. See, they taste nice. I just don't like the slimy part. But I don't like just tomatoes as a side. So some people like them on the side of the breakfast. Fried tomatoes, roast, whatever. I don't like that. What I do like, however, is I'll get a carton of tomato juice and I'll just drizzle a little bit just over the top of the fry up, just so you get that kind of tomatoey and salty flavor as well. It's very nice. And I usually have that with a couple of well-fired rolls. That's my ideal breakfast. And I'm aware I've gone on for almost 2 minutes talking about fried food. It's that good. Right, so what are some of your favorite breakfast ideas? Do you like a fry up yourself? If you do, then how would you modify it? Everyone's got their own preference. Or do you like to go for something healthy to start the day? Which makes perfect sense. For me, my breakfast can often be after doing several hours of work. So oftentimes, basically, the first meal of the day is essentially your breakfast. So for me, that can actually come late in the day sometimes. So what do you like to eat for a breakfast whenever you might happen to eat it? Okay, I'm going to stop yammering now and go eat, because you get me started on food, I could go all day. Oh, also, tomorrow Saturday, I'll do some kind of stream, don't know what. There's a new game I'm thinking of buying, but I'm trying to be a good boy and resist. So we might just do Phasmophobia. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.